Recently, I was wondering about how likely I'd be to survive different fictional events, like apocalyptic events or kaijus or anything like that. And to put that to the test, I decided to make a tier list. And so we're going to be basing my own stats off of my D&D video, which should be linked in the top right. And just as a reminder, in that video, I determined that I had a strength of 9, dexterity of 11, constitution of 10. And a commoner, which we'll just say is a normal person in this scenario, is like 10 strength, 10 dexterity, 10 constitution, but they can kind of vary. So I was slightly higher in dexterity, slightly lower in strength, but we can kind of equate that to just a normal person, which I guess doesn't really matter too much. But additionally for this video, I do have a decent amount of outdoor experience. I've gone camping. I've started fires on my own, like without matches. And so that will like keep that as like a survival, like in D&D, there's like a survival stat. So I'll kind of contribute to that and say that I have some ability to survive in like the wilderness if it comes down to that. And that's going to be pretty much the main information we need for this in order to figure out. And for the different events I'm going to put on the tier list, so like a couple rules. The first one being, I don't necessarily have to be like in the same place as the event. So like the Purge is going to be on there, and there's no requirement that's going to say I have to be in the same city as the Purge. So if I can like reason that I can leave or anything, that'll like rank up the survivability of that. And then the second rule is that we're going to be equalizing my technology that I have access to the era in which the event takes place. So an example of that would be the Desolations from the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I'll have like Bronze Age, like Iron Age technology. And for the Flood in Halo, I'll have like Halo Space Age technology. And so that's kind of how we're going to be doing it. All right, and now we're on the tier list. I have a collection of a few different apocalyptic events. Some of them are a little less apocalyptic and a little more just kind of like bad things that could happen. Like, so an example of that would be The Thing, where it isn't necessarily apocalyptic, but it could be, or The Purge is probably a little bit better of an example than The Thing. Anyways, we're going to go through all of these, and I'll tell you how I think I'd be able to handle each one, whether I'd survive or not. So the first one on the list is going to be the Desolations, which is an event from the Stormlight Archive, which is a Brandon Sanderson series. And without going into any like spoilers, there's essentially like a bunch of monsters and stuff, and it's a massive war that happens every so often, and humanity basically gets sent back to the Bronze Age. So basically they're so crippled from being in this like long war that they lose access to a lot of like their technology they had and are basically stuck in the Bronze Age. So they might progress through some technology by the time each one happens, and then they get reset. And since it is like a war like that, I'm gonna do probably wouldn't survive, because it's not a guarantee. I think it is possible to sort of avoid combat or like maybe survive, because obviously not everyone died in each desolation. Otherwise, there wouldn't really be any characters in the books. So because of that, I'm going to put it there. Now, my own abilities for this, I don't really have any. I wouldn't really be able to like do much against giant rock monsters and stuff. So the strategy would mostly just be to hide and hope that I'm not sent to the front lines of any battles. And the second one on this list is going to be a gamma ray burst, which essentially would just obliterate Earth unless we could move out of the way, which isn't really very possible because it moves at like the speed of light. So there isn't really anything I could do there. So gamma ray burst essentially releases more energy than the sun will in 10 billion years, which is a lot of energy. And so basically anything in its way gets completely eviscerated. So there isn't really much I could do, especially on anything like that at a planetary scale. So yeah, that one, I'm absolutely cooked. And the next one is like a kaiju event, kind of like Godzilla. I just went with Godzilla because it's kind of the most well-known one and the one I know the most. And for this one, I'm just going to use the Godzilla -1 incarnation because that's the one I'm most familiar with. I watched that movie fairly recently, and it is a really good movie. If you want to check that out, I think it's a really good movie. It's one of the like kaiju movies I've enjoyed most. Now, I haven't seen too many of them. I saw the 2017 Godzilla as well, and then some of the Kong ones. But of those, my favorite was definitely Godzilla -0. And something like this seems to be more localized in most of the adaptations. Like in Godzilla -1, it was entirely set in Japan. And so basically, I think I have a 50-50 to above a 50-50. I'm not really sure like the extent of Godzilla's durability. I know there's different incarnations, like there's Shin Godzilla, and some of them kind of get crazy. And I think Godzilla typically feeds off of nuclear radiation, so I don't know if there's any weapons that could stop Godzilla. But as long as Godzilla isn't feeling super angry, then most of the world should be safe. So I'm actually going to bump that up to probably survive. Now, if I was in like the localized area of where Godzilla was, I'd probably have to move that all the way down to probably wouldn't make it. Because I don't think I could really contend with a 300 feet tall monster like that. I think the next one we'll do will be the Protomolecule from The Expanse, which this is just a image from the TV show, which is on Amazon. But it's based off of the book series, and I'm about halfway through that series right now. I am on the Nemesis games. So this one is again kind of similar to Godzilla, where it depends on like locality and stuff. So we're gonna pretend that for this scenario that I am in like the time period of when this takes place, which is I think a few hundred years in the future. Essentially, humanity has fully colonized Mars and is working on terraforming Mars, and then also has several bases in the asteroid belt and on some like the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Um, and what the protomolecule does, if you're not familiar with it, is it kind of turns people into zombies, and it kind of rewrites genetic or rewrites information at a molecular level, so it can deconstruct things at a molecular level, stuff like that. And it kind of sort of has sentience. It's more so of like a program rather than actual sentience, where it tries to have its own survival. And with the protomolecule, if I was anywhere near it, probably not making out. Now, there's some characters who escape close glances with the protomolecule, but they're main characters, so you could argue they have some plot armor. And in addition to that, they do have like they are relatively skilled, especially skilled, especially in survival situations like that. And so basically, if I was anywhere near that, I would have a very low chance of escaping it. And if it ever like hit the sun or anything, it could like kind of destroy the sun or absorb the sun. It's kind of similar to gray goo in that sense. But if it doesn't hit the sun or doesn't hit the planet I'm on, then I would make it. But since it can kind of navigate and stuff like that, since it can kind of like change its direction, even if it's like flying through space, if you try to like crash something into it to move it aside, it can still like reroute and like figure out how to like get to you. So assuming I'm on Earth, I'll put probably wouldn't make it, just because that is a rather devastating piece of technology. And the next one on my list is the Terminator. So basically Skynet, which is kind of like an evil AI. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Terminator series. I haven't seen all of the movies. I've seen the first two. If the Terminators were actually hunting me, I don't think there's anything I could do besides get extremely lucky. So I'm going to say I'm cooked. We'll assume they're hunting me, or even if they took over the world, we'll actually assume that it's like the future where they take over. I don't think I could do anything there. Although it's kind of similar to the Desolations, except I don't know if humanity like bounces back after the Terminator show, because it's not like a recurring event. So I'm gonna put it absolutely cooked. And up next we have the clickers from The Last of Us. And so I'm not super different super next up we have the clickers from The Last of Us, and I'm not super familiar with the differences between the show and the games. I haven't really gotten I haven't had much experience with either, but from what I understand, they're kind of just like mushroom zombies. And I don't think they can spread through the air, like they can't infect people through airborne means, which means that they're not like, I wouldn't be absolutely cooked immediately, but they're still pretty dangerous, especially because they're a little bit more adaptable than regular zombies, since they do have that like communication through like the mycelium network, and then they also just have more variety. And for that, I'd put them in 50-50, because it would mostly be a game of bunker down and try to make sure I have resources. And I think that resource bit would let me survive for a while. But then after a certain point, having to venture further and further to get resources, or coming up with my own method of getting resources, would become difficult. And then I'm also not sure if if it's like an infection, if it can like transfer through water, because then I can't collect rainwater and have to rely on bottled water, which makes it much more difficult. And after that, we have the Flood from Halo, and that's going to go in absolutely cooked because the Flood is basically a complex parasite, like kind of like a zombie apocalypse, but it's basically able to gain intelligence over time, and it gets more and more powerful. And like in the universe, I believe like the only way to really contain it is once it's on a world, at a certain point they just have to like destroy the entire world to hope to contain it. So it's kind of similar to like Chaos in Warhammer 40K. And overall, I'd put that in absolutely cooked because there's not really anything I would be able to do that against that, because it can be airborne and can have technology and develop technology, and it's just kind of impossible to deal with. And now we have the first easy peasy one, and that's going to be the Purge. And the Purge, since it's like a sanctioned event in the universe, then since we know it's coming, it'd be pretty easy to like bunker down or just like leave, go on vacation that week or however long it is, go on vacation for a day, take an out of town trip, you know. It's not that hard to survive since it's so localized. And then even if you are there, it is possible to completely bunker down and stay protected. Just get like some concrete and like fill up the entrance to like wherever you are, and they can't really do anything. So because of the invention of concrete, I'm going to say the Purge is easy peasy because that's really all you need, some concrete and water, and you can kind of build your own bunker in a last case like scenario like that. Now getting out after you pour the concrete might be a little tough. And the next one is the Thing, and this one is gonna go in absolutely cooked. There isn't really anything you can do about that. So if you haven't seen the Thing, it's essentially this alien life form, and it can inhabit like other people's bodies or creatures' bodies. So it can like take over a dog or like a person, and then there's no functional way to tell it apart from anyone from the there's no functional way to tell it apart from the person that it takes over because it gains all their memories. So there's no way you can like figure out that it's a thing. So you can't trust anyone in that scenario. And since it's an alien, it's also really tough to get rid of. You need like a lot of fire, and even then, I'm of the opinion that they did not win in the Thing movie. They also have that newer one, but I've only seen the original. And in the movie, they have it contained in Antarctica, sort of contained, but it does like learn how to build like spaceships and stuff, or it can learn technology over time, so you can't even reliably contain it because it can eventually outsmart you. Up next, we have The Walking Dead. That one I'm going to put in easy peasy just because like as the rules of the show seem to be, they seem to be like decaying at a standard rate. So like if you go to like a warmer climate, then they can't last as long. And I guess if you go to like a cold climate, they can last a little longer because they can like freeze. But since they're like rotted, I should be able to like have more physical capabilities than any of them. Because like based on my D&D stats video, I was like slightly above average for most of my like physical characteristics. And so that should like keep me above the zombies. In the D&D stat block for zombies, they do have a bonus to strength and to constitution, which I guess makes sense. Like I would say that compared to like a commoner or a common person in D&D, a zombie would definitively have more constitution, like be more durable because they're undead. And then the strength, you could argue, because they no longer have any like limitations, like they don't need to protect their like tendons or anything. They can have like one time like burst of strength that would like tear all their ligaments, but that would make them stronger than the normal person. However, in the show they don't really like do that. They're not really like flipping cars or anything, and they're also like rotted, so like over time their stats would decrease, which makes them much more viable. And like yeah, getting bit and like worrying about water contamination would be rough from like the blood of the zombies, but other than that, there's like various ways to filter water and like boil it. And I don't know exactly how like the virus works in the show, if you can like boil it out of water, but I assume so given how many characters survive. And I think as long as like you're not in a highly populated urban area, you should be pretty safe from a like zombie apocalypse, especially if you have like wilderness skills. And I have enough like wilderness skills to like make it for like a little bit in the woods on my own with like no resources. So that should make it like pretty easy to outlast a zombie apocalypse. And then there's also the entire scenario of, oh, you could just like find a boat, and then they can't really swim, so you should be safe on a boat for however long you need to. And then there's fish. You can make like salt sills, and then you can make like filtration devices to filter the salt out of the water. with like plastic bottles. So you don't really need to worry about them like too much as long as you like stay away. And then of course going into cities can be like risky, but I think long term it would be pretty easy to wait it out. And the next one is Yellowstone supervolcano eruption. And for this one, again, it's pretty locality based, but there's enough modern technology that I think it's like fairly survivable. I'm gonna put 50-50 just because the actual eruption is not the dangerous part of a supervolcano eruption. The problem would be the ash clouds it generates, which prevents sunlight, and basically creates like an atmosphere around like the planet, or like the Yellowstone one would cover most of the United States. So like certain parts of the world would still get enough sunlight to grow crops, but you'd have to be very selective about what crops you're growing. And then it could also like contaminate rainwater with like the ash and lye. So it would be pretty tough to survive, but there's enough technology on like filtration and like indoor plant growing, like hydroponics and like everything like that, that I think it would be doable. It just depends on if I'm lucky enough to like be ready by the time it like explodes, like be able to like find someplace that can like support those needs of like indoor plant growing and whatnot. The other part of that is you do have to wait for the plants to grow. So you'd have to rely on like lettuce, which has like a 2 to 4 week growing time or something like that. Um, but like that's, you can't really make it 2 to 4 weeks reliably without eating. So you would have to rely on like canned food until then, which can be like pretty tough. And then getting the proper nutrients. So I'm kind of debating moving it down to probably wouldn't survive. But for now, I put it in 50-50. It would also cause a lot of congestion because like a lot of people would have to move away from that part of the world, which would obviously make more people in the other parts of the world. I'm going to leave it in 50-50 for now, but I might come back to it. Next one's gray goo. There's nothing you can really do there. Maybe there's nothing you can really do there. Maybe you could get lucky with like an EMP device or something to like try to shut them down, but then there's no guarantee that would work with gray goo. And if you don't understand what gray goo is, it's basically like a self-replicating device. So they devour matter and then use it to create different matter. Like they use that matter and put it into self-replication. So they basically are ever consuming and all growing. So there isn't really like a way to stop them. And that's like one of the theories of like space travel, because you can make like self-replicating drones. um this is kind of tied to like the dark forest theory of why haven't we met any aliens yet, but it could just be like the self-replicating drones. But unfortunately that does mean that any planets they discover are basically wiped out of any like organic matter, if that's what they use, or any kind of matter they use. But anyways, if those were invented, there wouldn't really be much you could do. All right, and then for the last one, we have the War of the Worlds, and I just kind of use this as a regular stand-in for an alien invasion. And so in War of the Worlds, it's specifically Martians, and they have these like giant walkers that can shoot like heat rays, like poison gas, and there isn't really any reliable way for like the US or like any like world military to stop them. And then in like the book, they're eventually stopped. Spoiler warning if you don't want a spoiler for the War of the Worlds, which I think was written like almost 100 years ago now, but just in case. But they essentially die off from like human diseases. It's because like they're like Martians and they haven't been exposed to like human diseases, so that's kind of how they like end up losing. Um, so this would just be a waiting game on if I could like last long enough to see the diseases start working. So overall, I'd say probably wouldn't survive, just because that's like pretty heavy duty alien invasion. Might get lucky though. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. If you would, oh, actually, I'm gonna quickly rearrange these based on how easy. So this first like easy peasy category, that's pretty reliable. Purge, Walking Dead, just because Walking Dead lasts longer and is less like reliable to like outrun, but still should be pretty easy. And I'd say like easy is like 90% survival odds. Probably survive, I'd put it like 75%, and there's only one entry there, which is Kaiju. Um, I am being a little optimistic in all of these scenarios, because otherwise, basically all of them would be in the bottom two categories. Um, so that one's like locality based, so I might be able to like dodge that though. And then 50-50, we have like the Cordyceps, Last of Us zombies. And I do think those would be a little harder to survive than the super volcano. Could be wrong there, but we're gonna say that I'm right. And for probably wouldn't make it, we'll say like 25% chance. Maybe slightly lower. I think I do have the highest chance of making it through a desolation. And Protomolecule is risky. I can't do anything. Like, I have no action there that I can take to protect myself. So I would just be reliant on the Protomolecule and like whatever. Same thing with War of the Worlds. There's no real action I could take. I could like try to hide, I guess, which is more reliable than the Protomolecule. So I actually move this over. Um, I suppose in this 50-50 one, moving back up, I could take action in this like cordyceps one. Like there's steps I could take to like defend myself, like trying to like build a bunker, like gather supplies and stuff. And I guess for Supervolcano, that's true too. Like I couldn't prevent anything, I guess. We'll go with that. Absolutely cooked. Obviously, gamma ray burst is not at all survivable. I think I'm gonna say Terminator, like Skynet, is the easiest because there are survivors in that. But they have to rely on going to the past to like prevent Terminators from being created to like reliably do that. They have to go to the past to prevent like the Terminators from being created to reliably survive. But there are still people around when the movie is shown. I don't remember how far in the future that is or like how long the Terminators have been around at that point. But I think it is more possible, especially with time travel. And then the thing, the problem with these last three, the flood, gray goo, and gamma ray burst, is that it's just instantaneous. There's like nothing you can do. And the thing, like, it would take a little bit of time. So just for that, I'll move it up. And then flood, I mean, they kind of fight it in Halo, I guess, but not very reliably. And gray goo and flood could probably be pretty interchangeable here. And then gamma ray burst is at the end because there's not really much you can do there. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. I should have a more consistent upload schedule going forward. We'll see how strict I am to that, but I have a couple more other videos in the works that should be out within a few weeks. So if you want to stay tuned for those, there'll be a little bit different content than this, but they'll still be coming out pretty soon. All right, thank you.